Hello, everybody. I'm Logan Crawford, and this is the award-winning TV talk show right here on TheFreshOutlook. Thousands are flooding into Europe. Syrians, Iraqis, and others. Some are escaping war. Others are seeking economic opportunity. They trek from Syria into Turkey and then north into Europe. The ultimate destination for many is said to be the EU's economic powerhouse, Germany. The people of Germany are expected to admit as many as 800,000 people alone this year. Take a look.
Syria, a country of war, death, and destruction. The way of life since the civil war broke out in 2011. Now, with assaults from ISIL, a mass exodus is underway from people who want a better way of life or who just want to live. The path forged by millions goes through or around Turkey, northeast through Greece, Serbia, Hungary, Austria, and into the country with generous immigration laws, Germany. Last weekend, Germany took in 20,000 migrants and is preparing for 800,000 this year. Last weekend, Pope Francis appealed to the 120,000 Catholic parishes in Europe, the religious community, and sanctuaries to take in a family of refugees, saying he would host 2 families in the Vatican. But not all parishes are on board with that idea.
Nel mio pellegrinaggio ho voluto fortemente incontrare voi che a causa di sanguinosi conflitti avete dovuto lasciare le vostre case e la vostra patria.
Meanwhile, there is the U.S., where immigration is a hot-button talking point among presidential candidates.
I think the entire world has to come together. It should not be just 1 or 2 countries.
We cannot help everybody throughout the world.
The White House announced that the United States would take in as many as 10,000 Syrian refugees next year. Since 2011, over 1,500 refugees have been settled into the U.S., with Texas, California, and Michigan leading in the numbers. Relocating displaced Syrians is an immediate crisis, but still, the root cause needs to be addressed: the war itself in the country where millions once called home.
We're back live on set now here at Fresh Outlook. I am joined by the Fresh Outlook think tank, Gary Shaye of Save the Children, Bill Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University, Dr. Bart Rossi, political psychologist, and joining us live via Skype in D.C. is Tom Squitieri, an author and journalist. And Gary, I'm going to start with you because you have the biggest dog in this fight. Save the Children is at the forefront of the relief effort overseas. Tell me what that effort is like and what's being done to save the children and the adults who are emigrating through Europe right now.
Save the Children has been working in the Middle East for over 4 decades. We're on the ground in Jordan and Lebanon, where 20 to 25% of the populations of both countries are refugees, have fled Syria. In Europe, we have programs in Germany, in Serbia, and we're expanding, and we've been in Italy since 2008, helping migrants who are fleeing the conflict, not just in Syria, but other conflicts like Sudan, Eritrea, and even Nigeria. So we're offering programs of child protection, which is our primary focus, to make sure children are safe. There are many children who are coming unaccompanied, separated from their parents. So we want to be sure they're safe in their journey to Northern Europe.
Okay, we're going to get more back to you in just a second on the relief efforts. Bill, I'm going to turn to you. This is like a huge social experiment. I can't remember in my history of doing news over the last 35 years this type of mass migration where you see tens of thousands of people pouring into foreign countries.
Right. I think one of the things that hit me initially was, number one, what we're seeing right now is a sort of replication of what happened in pre-World War II Germany, when the Jews were trying to escape out of Germany, and no country would take them in, including the United States. There's a very famous illustration of the St. Louis, who basically tried to drop people into various countries in Central America and the United States, and they were basically refused. The nice thing here is that countries are stepping up to the plate on some level, but not all countries are stepping up to the plate. The other thing I would just point out that I think is really important is it's only about maybe the last 6 or 8 weeks that this firestorm of coverage really took off. What's been happening as our guest said, in Jordan and in Lebanon has been going on for a long time. Now it's a worldwide international story on the front page of all the major newspapers and television programs, because now they're attempting to get into Europe. And I think that's the big change. Before they were going to neighboring countries, now they're trying to get into Europe. And once they get into Europe, because of the way the laws are written, they can move anywhere they want, okay? So because it's a EU zone. And I think we also have to recognize, my last point would be, there's a difference between refugees and immigrants. Refugees are people leaving a conflict zone because they basically have to. Immigrants have as a component refugees, but they're also leaving for other reasons. And right now we're facing really a refugee crisis more than just an immigration crisis.
Let's turn to Dr. Rossi. One of the images that captured the hearts, minds, imaginations of the world was the image of that 2-year-old boy who had washed ashore at the Mediterranean. Those are the types of powerful images we're seeing every day, and they're spurring some people to action, fortunately.
Yes, I mean, I put my social psychological hat on for this one, and what I think about is, you know, post-traumatic stress and how people, especially kids, become so hyper-vigilant. You know, they feel like at any moment something terrible is going to happen to them. So the magnitude of this is really much more than just the physical and the fact of just trying to stay alive. It's the whole mental, psychological impact that this is having on kids especially, but certainly adults as well. How do you deal with a situation where you're not even sure if you're going to be alive in the next hour or two, you know, and you don't know what's going to happen to you, your family? So the mental health aspect of this is overwhelming by itself.
Let's turn to Tom Squitieri, who is joining us via Skype. Tom, what's your take on this migration that is taking place now through Europe?
I believe everything the previous gentleman had said is true, and that's what makes it such a compelling moment of crisis, in that there are so many different aspects of this crisis that have come together. Just going back to the picture of that toddler on the beach, that's almost a universal empathetic moment. And those are the kind of moments in the media sometimes that have an impact. It used to be known as the CNN effect, but it's not really CNN any longer. These stories have been written about, and the crisis have been going on for 4 years. What is it now that causes it to take notice of the world? And the question I have is, how long will we take notice, we being the world, and how, if anything, what will be done about it? Because these temporary things are just that, temporary. The crisis will go on and perhaps worsen. Winter is coming, for example. How will we react now with the opportunity? You mentioned how the United States is taking in up to 10,000 in the next fiscal year. 10,000? That's less than the population of National Stadium here in Washington, D.C., in a country of 300 million. It's a start, but we all need to get together and figure out how we're going to deal with this in a rational and hopefully organized manner.
Okay, part of that is Save the Children. What needs to be done? I mean, I've seen images of sandwiches being thrown to these migrants, fed basically like animals. I also see a lot of adult men. I don't see that many children. Do you have a breakdown at all of how many are actually children, or percentage-wise?
Our figures and figures from UNHCR say half of the people migrating are children and youth. What often happens, and I saw this recently in the Zatari camp in Jordan, where we've been working for 4.5 years, is that oftentimes the women and children come to the camp. The husband or man of the house will stay behind in Syria to protect the property and make sure it's safe. But what is happening now, certainly in Jordan, is services are being reduced, because the international agencies just don't have the resources to manage the people in camps, plus the people in host communities who are throughout the region, and the new refugee crisis. So as people see services reduced, they become more desperate. And now that this land bridge is open, they know they can't go back to Syria. Services are reduced, they can't work, kids can't go to school. They're going to a place, what we would do if we wanted a better opportunity for children, similar to what people in Central America did when they tried to get into the States because they were affected by violence, extortion, and they were afraid children would get into gangs. So what can we do? We can provide more support to the humanitarian community. We can advocate for a permanent solution to the situation in Syria. We have more than half of the population of Syria either displaced internally or displaced throughout the region. in the Middle East and now moving toward Europe. And that will continue until there's some permanent solution found. We also can advocate with Senator Kerry, with our senators and congressmen, to raise the ceiling for the number of people who can come and resettle here in the United States. We've already written to Secretary of State Kerry. We've encouraged all our supporters to do the same, but we're doing this all over the world because Save the Children has offices in Norway and Sweden and Germany, and we're all mobilized together to look for a solution and attend to the people who are on the move, children on the move.
Part of the solution, Bill, could be the United States. When the United States fails to lead, the world bleeds. We're seeing that in Syria now. The Obama doctrine of hands off, back out of Iraq, hands off of Syria, red line in the sand, back off of that, let ISIS have a free hand, has created an intolerable situation for millions of people who are suffering and dying. And I say part of that blood is on Barack Obama's hands. What say you? What should the United States be doing?
I think you're being a little too critical of Barack Obama. Barack Obama's intention was to try and do more, but the United States Congress said
the road to heck is paved with good intentions, Bill.
But the other thing that I would say to you is that I think beyond what's happened in the past, the real critical question is what's going to be the future. And the future is that we have all of these individuals who have left their homes. And as long as the ISIL and Syrian conflict continues, those people are not going back. And the longer they're refugees and they get established in new countries, the less likely they're going to go back, which means the people that are still there are going to be the combatants, okay, that are on the ISIL side, that are on the Free Syrian Army side, and the Assad side. Remember, just a few years ago, Assad was our enemy. Now Assad is our co-conspirator, okay? So what we have to do is we have to figure out, and it's not just a U.S. problem, how we're going to solve this. And as long as this goes on, and the longer it goes on, the harder it's going to be to resolve, because these people are going to get established and they're not going to be interested in going back to a potentially dangerous situation.
Yeah, and Logan, to your point, I think that this conflict, that the psychology of this conflict is really based a lot in religion, extreme religious views, okay? All these different factions that are there. So the psychology of this doesn't really work well. And for America to put boots on the ground and get involved in a religious war is a whole other issue, besides the refugees and everything else. How do we fight ISIL, all these other different factions, and come out a winner? So I understand the president's reluctance to get involved. If he did, I think he would be murdered, quote unquote, politically, because he got us involved in another war. And why a religious war? Why are we fighting that religious war?
I'm going to let that question sit with our audience and viewers. I'm going to turn to Tom and put the same question to you. What should America be doing? Should we be doing more militarily? Should we be doing more on a humanitarian level as well?
One thing, I don't know if you know this, I teach college as well. And one thing I like to remind my students is that we can solve the problems of the world in the world that we're in right now. So you guys can argue about who caused the war in Iraq, and I think there's enough blame to go around everybody. But right now, we have a situation where people, innocent people, need help. We can't go into Syria, we probably can't go into Lebanon or the region to help them, but now that some of them are in Europe, and we can help those in Europe now. The United States should be part of a leadership effort to look at the situation on the ground in Europe realistically, realizing that each country has their own concerns about immigration and migration and opportunities in each country, and work with those nations to help establish the best conditions to relocate the migrants when possible, help them move on to wherever they can go if possible, and help feed them with winter coming, as I mentioned before. Having covered refugee situations, including the Kurds in the mountains of Iraq, when winter comes, and your friend from our representative from Save the Children can attest to this, the situation becomes dire, even worse than it is now. We have a situation that needs addressed now that we can actually address. We're in Europe where there's no war going on. We should address that situation and realize the macro politics of dealing with the horrible situation in Syria and Iraq and in the Middle East and generally. All the problems that stem from the war and lack of opportunity cannot be addressed now, and we shouldn't pawn off the fact that we can't address that problem with the problem we can't address.
All right, Tom, thank you for your time. We have 1 minute left. I'm going to give it to Gary because you are hands-on in this relief effort. For the people who are watching who want to help, how can they help save the children and others? Is there a website? Is there a text number?
Yes, they can go to our website, www.savethechildren.org. Our Syria child migrant crisis is front page, front and center. People can advocate, people can make a donation. Help us help children affected by this conflict, both in the Middle East and in the places they're relocating. We'd like them to look and see what we're doing. We work in healthcare, child protection, and we set up transit stations in many of the places where the migrants are passing to make sure they get water, they have shelter, and they have a place just so their parents or mother in some cases can take a moment to figure out the next steps and get some advice on where they might be going.
I know you don't have a crystal ball, but do you think eventually these refugees and migrants will return to their homeland?
I have to say, I think it's a long way off. And that's why a political solution among all the different countries, together with the European nations, we have to find a solution so eventually they can go back. And people are very far away from that right now. And what's happening in the camps right now, there's less food because there's not as much resources. Kids cannot go to school. We have some classes. You have people recruiting for ISIS just outside the camp. So the alternative is very dark. We have to work on this together on both the advocacy front, which is vital, but also provide services as the other guests have talked about today.
Gary Shaye, Save the Children, Bill Rosenberg, Dr. Bart Rossi, thank you, gentlemen, for your insight on this issue. When we come back, we're going to talk about a much lighter topic, Tom Brady. He wins in court, and guess what? On the field again after this.